If there's something to be faced back there, Saz's face, should be the one to face it.
Well, you know what Ronnie would say? If you don't face your fears will eat your face.
Will fear lead our trio to paradise? As we meet some interesting stuntman and get the return of Scottish Paul Rudd and finally get the reveal behind why the Westies act so damn weird, as we got a murder to solve, as I'll be breaking down this 4th season of Only Murders in the Building, episode 4, spoilers ahead. We open with Charles having a surreal dream which includes Zaz walking towards something as she eventually turns around with a bullet hole in her chest mentioning going to paradise. Now this dream leads Charles to create a second murder board exclusively for Zaz to fill in the blanks of her life. We learn that the Westies have been a cold lead for Mabel, who hasn't had the best of luck squatting and hasn't gained much information from her new neighbors, as they take a look at Vince, who's messing around with a Portuguese flag. As we find out later, this is most likely a gift from Dudenoff, or at the very least a sign from Vince showing respects to the person that's helping him afford his apartment. More on that reveal later. Charles notices that Oliver is short of rest, as it seems as though there may be a little bit of trouble in paradise for Oliver and Loretta, or at least from Oliver's perspective. After he took a deep dive into despair after discovering a man's arm around Loretta's shoulder in an IG picture he found on her account. So let's go ahead and start the theory train and speculate which celebrity arm will be revealed to be the one in this photo. Now Oliver's misery leads to Mabel seeing that Zaz liked one of her photos, which means that Zaz had an account as well. As they find her account and they see that her last photo had the caption "concussions" on the day that she died.
Open to the public since the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Now this may end up being a nothing burger, but whenever a date is mentioned, it makes me think it's important. Now Oliver mentioning that the bar being open to the public since 1964 seems important, but also makes me think about what Charles said in the previous episode about something else from the 1960s.
Williams said the bullet was a Winchester 300 Magnum, developed in the 60s. It remains the most popular cartridge among hunters.
Again, this may be a coincidence, but maybe whoever the killer is, there may be some connection to the 60s. Remember I mentioned in my last week's breakdown of the shot of the trailer of someone appearing to be the shooter wearing what appears to be disco attire. For some reason, I'm starting to think that maybe the person behind this is connected to Hollywood in some way. By the way, was I the only one that got a good laugh out of the Oliver bit with the whole iPad and Instagram size being so big? Because personally, I know a few people that have their font size that big, but also with the brightness being up and him telling the iPad to turn it down and calling Siri Susie was the cherry on top. Now the title of this week's episode, which was The Stunt Man, is taken from a 1980 action movie thriller. After watching the trailer of this movie and reading the synopsis, it sounds pretty interesting and I might have to check it out. Basically, the film is about a guy on the run from the police and he runs into a film production and does something bad to the lead of the film, who's also the stunt man, and the director of that movie hires that criminal in a replacement, but things get very complicated. Now a lot of the movie titles and the titles of this episode don't have a lot of correlation or a lot in common besides the titles, but this week's movie ties into a theory I'll be sharing about maybe someone in this show not being who they say they are. As we cut to the scene with Mabel and Howard, that honestly didn't really seem that important to me, and it only really set the stage for Howard in this episode, as he has to be tasked with apartment sitting while Mabel investigates the bar lead. Now whether it be Howard apartment sitting or taking care of the pig or being the one with the dog that finds the body, or for example he was the one that got the message for the ham radio, obviously Howard's a fan favorite. And it's clear as day that the show definitely wants us to know that he is the supporting character that is a series regular. So to me, all these Howard moments has to be leading up to something. Like I feel like he's going to be a part of the big discovery of finding out who the killer is, and his idea of this animal podcast I hope has a good payoff and comes full circle. Because if not, a lot of these scenes that we get with Howard seems to lead nowhere. Now back with our trio, I have to admit I had some good laughs with Oliver creating that fake Instagram account under the name Ronnie. It definitely had some funny lines to me in this episode, and his little sayings was just hilarious.
Power of positive thinking. She's my finsta. Where my attention goes, energy flows.
As they arrive to the bar Concussions, they try to talk to the bartender, but it's clear as day that he and the stuntman aren't fans of the trio. They all feel as though that the trio is profiting off of Zaz's death, and to make matters worse, they didn't even have a proper stuntman's funeral for Zaz because no body, no funeral. And all of a sudden, in comes a surprise that I surely wasn't expecting this season, and it's Ben, but it's not Ben, it's his stunt double, played by, of course, Paul Rudd with a Scottish accent. Now, for a second there, I thought my whole Ben has a twin, Ben is a triplet theory all came back from last season. Man, that theory still haunts me today. But I will point out in this moment, Ben's double seeing a rat, or at least he thinks he sees a rat in a bar. It can be the show just showing us that he has some screws loose after years of being Ben's stunt double. But hear me out with this one. What if this is all being used for foreshadowing? What if the rat is leading us to someone being a rat amongst a trio and then being a traitor? Now, after getting introduced to Ben's stunt double, in comes a mysterious woman who walks into the back room, and Mabel, of course, being Nancy Drew, she notices that the light matches the same one from Zaz's IG post, but unfortunately, they're not welcome to the bar and they get kicked out. Now, Ben's stunt double follows them outside to beg Charles for a job on their film and proceeds to make a fool of himself by doing stunts, which leads to them agreeing for him to join the film to make him stop, but in exchange, he must give them some information on Zaz's last photo on her Instagram that was took near that back room. As the stunt double tells them about Dr. Maggie, Ben calls her a miracle worker, aka a chiropractor. As Charles wants to talk to her alone,
I think if there's something to be faced back there, Zaz's face, should be the one to face it.
Now back with Howard, a mysterious person slides an audition flyer under the door. Now I wonder if there's any connection to who delivered this flyer to Howard and who's the one that put the sign about not allowing them to film the movie in the building. Now at this edition, we see the brother sisters are present as well as producer Barb, as Howard doesn't get the part as he learns that Josh Gad will be playing him in the movie. Again, I just have to believe that this is all leading to something bigger, but at face value, the Howard scene again just seemed like scenes to fill in the episode's runtime and meant to just kind of showcase Howard, again, a fan favorite, but it's not really moving the story forward. Now, if you want to look at it from a character's perspective, we all know that last season's play had him singing on stage, and we learned that Howard's dream was to always be an actor, and maybe this is coming back into play, but again, I just hope that it plays into the larger story, into what's going on. Now, Charles gets the opportunity to meet Maggie, and he learns that Zaz was preparing for retirement, and
she didn't say what, but it had something to do with the difficult relationship she was in. She was tired of giving more than she got from this person. She didn't know how to get away.
Now Maggie ends up unlocking Charles's deepest feelings while working on his back, which takes him back to his dreams. This time around, we see that Zaz is even more beaten up than she was in his last dream. After waking up, Charles is now under the impression that Zaz's bad relationship was with him. Now I talked about this at the beginning of episode 1 of this season, of how I always felt that their relationship was more complex than what we actually thought it was. But I don't think Zaz was talking about Charles. I think that maybe she was referring to our mystery killer. Now back with Oliver and Mabel, he admits that he almost proposed to Loretta back in episode 1 of this season. He admits that he's afraid that she's too famous for him now, and he's also believing that he's a failure. Now, the Oliver jealous subplot this week definitely kind of leads to them setting up a moment between them dismissing his thoughts at some point, and I do think eventually Oliver will propose to Loretta sometime by the end of this season. Now, in comes Howard, who confronts Mabel about their one-sided relationship, as Mabel realizes that no one is watching the apartment, which leads her to going back to finding the Westies inside. Now, Mabel just wants to get to the heart of their strange and weird behavior, as she ultimately learns that they are illegally subletting rent-controlled apartments, and it's all a rent control scheme. As all the apartments on this floor at one point was all rented by Dutinoff, and all of these individuals came across him at some point in their lives. As they say, they consider themselves to be outsiders or weirdos, but he just wanted to help them out by allowing them to stay, and he takes care of them even though he's retired and living in Portugal. He sends them some ham once a month, and in exchange they pay him rent for as little as $200 to live there. Now, to answer the question behind who the mystery woman was on the radio, well, that is the person by the name of Helga, who was Rudy's ex-crazy girlfriend who lives in Finland. At the end of the day, they claim that they're just silly, regular weirdos, and they offer Mabel if she wants to get in on the scheme. So yeah, do you all think this is all true and that's just the end of the story? They're just a bunch of weirdos living here for peanuts. Dudenoff is just a nice person sending them a ham once a month, and Helga is just a jealous ex-crazy girlfriend from Finland? I'm sorry, I'm calling BS on that story. Now, there may be some truth in that, but there's definitely more to Helga, and there's definitely more to Dudenoff and his little scheme. I'm telling y'all right now, Dudenoff definitely has some more schemes up their sleeve. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if they were the one that got the building shut down to the main entrance many decades ago, and I just think that they have a scheme that may be involved with the production of the movie. Now, ultimately, Mabel tells the crew about what she discovered and that she's now also a part of this scheme, and now has a place to officially call home, at least for now. As they salt in their recent sorrows, Mabel letting Howard down, Oliver being jealous of his girlfriend's success, and Charles not being there for Zaz. Now Ronnie being deleted, this leads to Charles ultimately deciding to be the stand-in for the funeral for Zaz. One would say this is him actually tapping in. I don't know, man, this might be another foreshadowing, but Charles tapping in for Zaz in the funeral might be something that we see him doing in the future. Now during this ceremony, we see Charles getting hit by bottles that are fake in the face as a tradition, but unfortunately one of the bottles were real, which actually knocks out Charles to a flashback. Now we end this episode with the flashback showing us a time where Zaz was telling Charles about her retirement plan, which is her teaching the youth how to become stunt performers by opening a trampoline park, which happens to be the paradise that was mentioned in Charles's dreams. As we flash forward into present day, we see our trio arrives to Zaz's Impact Academy in New Jersey. As they walk around, they come across what looks to be a hideout where they find Bev the producer, who has a gun in hand and pointing at them and threatens to kill them. I'm calling it now, this is all one big misunderstanding or a huge misdirect. I can see it being revealed that Bev is probably secretly looking into this murder for the sake of the film, and maybe she knew Zaz working within the Hollywood system. But with that being said, let's get into this week's suspect list. Now admittedly, there's not much to look into in this week's episode, but let's go down a rabbit hole, and I want to start off with the Stunt Man community. We have a situation where we're dealing with a jealous stunt worker whose dream was to be a stunt double for Charles, but was beat out by Zaz and has spent decades being jealous and ultimately killed one of their own, which actually ties into my theory about Ben's double seeing rats. What about Dr. Maggie? Who is she exactly? Like, is she an actual doctor? Is she the rat? Is she pretending to be someone that she's not? Now we know that Zaz and her spent a lot of time together, and of course it was led to believe that it was because she was helping her out, she was healing her body. But what if they had a more romantic relationship and things got out of hand and one thing led to another and bang, Maddie killed Zaz. Now of course there's not a lot of evidence in that so far, but I do have a feeling that Zaz wasn't talking about Charles maybe being the one that she was referring to as far as being in a bad relationship. Now, let me share some Hail Mary theories with you all that might not end up going absolutely nowhere, but let's have some fun. Going back to who's the mystery person with the flyers, who's Loretta's mystery man, and what's Howard gonna do with the whole animal podcast? Now, I want to take a look at the underlying theme of this episode. Now, to me, the idea of a stunt man and doubling for someone, or in basic terms, pretending to be someone that they're not. For example, we saw Oliver pretending to be Ronnie, the Westies pretending to be living in the building legally, Charles having to be the body in a funeral, or Howard having to play a role of himself. It all kind of leads to this idea that someone isn't who they say they are. It just seems to me that someone pretending to be someone that they're not is where we're heading to be the reveal of the killer. Which leads me back to the Westies and Dudenoff and wondering who else has lived on this floor. But also, let me put my theory in reverse about pretending. What if the Westies are doubling or covering, or like a stunt person, being the face for Dudenoff and taking a fall for something that they did? But overall, like I said in last week's breakdown, this show has a trend. It has a pattern to where we'll get an episode that's filled with clues and a bunch of answers, but then to fill the 10 episode season, we'll get the occasional episode or episodes where things are just happening and we meet some interesting new characters and they really don't add much to the overall story, but then you'll throw in a Maddie or Ben's double, or we have this mini arc for a side character like Howard, and at the very end we get some cliffhanger to make us want to come back for next week. But like I said, as far as this episode goes, I had some good laughs with the Ronnie bit, and it's always great to see Paul Rudd, but there wasn't a lot to chew on with this episode. To me, I will put this in the category of a setup episode, just like last week's, and hopefully we can look back at these episodes and say, oh yeah, those were the episodes that were actually important. Now, before we wrap up, I want to give you all a little sneak peek of next week's episode, which is titled Adaptation, and the synopsis reads: the trio face off against a collection of individuals who deceive, manipulate, and threaten as second nature a Hollywood cast and crew. Which to me sounds like the film is officially going into production. That's going to be the end of this week's breakdown of Only Murders in the Building. It is now your turn to go down in the comments and share your thoughts about everything that we discussed in this breakdown, but also make sure to share your Easter eggs, your deeper meanings. What did you all take away from this episode? And of course, share your awesome theories about what do you think about Maggie? What do you think about Howard and his situation, his subplot? Is Bev, the producer, involved at all? And who else lived on the floor of the Westies, and what's going on with Dudenoff? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. Now, of course, if you all have stuck around to this point in the video, I really appreciate the support. If you're still here, do me a favor, put in the comments right now, #Paradise. I'll be back, of course, next week to discuss episode 5. If you all appreciate the breakdown, make sure to hit the thumbs up, but also consider sharing this video to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about this show. And please consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel and hitting that bell notification. You all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.
Yeah.